The old man caught my wrist before I reached my daughter's front steps, pressed a folded scrap of paper into my palm, and whispered, "Get her out today if you still want her alive." Then he walked away without looking back. I stood frozen beside my truck, watching my son-in-law's black SUV disappear around the corner while the stranger limped toward a faded Buick parked halfway down the block. The paper felt damp from his hand. When I opened it, the message was written in shaky blue ink. "Don't let her drink anything from the kitchen." For one foolish second, I wondered whether this was some neighborhood prank. Then something shattered inside the house. My daughter cried out, and every doubt vanished. My name is Walter Mercer. I was 68 years old that spring, a retired industrial safety engineer who had spent 40 years learning that disasters rarely begin with explosions. They begin with one small warning everyone decides to ignore. Before I tell you what I found in Emily's kitchen, remember that the smallest warning can be the only honest thing in the room. I crossed the yard faster than my knees had moved in years and tried the front door. Locked. That alone made my stomach tighten. Emily had called the night before and asked me to come at 8 to look at a leaking faucet beneath the kitchen sink. She knew I still carried the spare key she had given me after moving in. Grant knew it too. I unlocked the door and stepped into a silence broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator. "Emily," I called. No answer. Then I saw the broken glass scattered across the tile, and my daughter sitting against the lower cabinets with one hand pressed to her chest. Her dark hair hung across her face, and her skin looked pale enough to belong to someone under hospital lights. A thick green smoothie ran down the cabinet door and pooled around her bare feet. "Dad, don't make a big deal out of this," she said, before I even reached her. That sentence frightened me more than the glass. People say things like that when they have already been taught that their pain is an inconvenience. I knelt beside her and checked her pulse the way the plant nurses had shown me years ago. It fluttered beneath my fingers, quick and uneven. Emily had lived with a mild heart rhythm disorder since college. Nothing dangerous if monitored, but stress and certain medications could aggravate it. "You're going to the emergency room," I said. She pushed my hand away. I stood up too fast. "That's all." Her words were clear, but slow, as though each one had to travel through deep water before reaching her mouth. On the counter sat a plastic organizer labeled with the days of the week, a bottle of vitamins, and a second glass of the same green drink. Grant had arranged everything neatly beside a handwritten note. "Drink all of it. Love you." I looked from the note to the warning in my pocket. "Did you take anything this morning?" I asked. Emily frowned at the organizer. "Just what Grant set out. He's been helping because I keep forgetting." She tried to stand, failed, and gave a little embarrassed laugh. That was when I understood the stranger had not chosen his words for drama. I reached for the untouched glass, but Emily caught my sleeve. "Please don't start again." Her voice sharpened with a strength her body did not seem to have. "Grant has been taking care of me for months. You show up and immediately act like something is wrong with him." I set the glass back down, though every instinct told me to pour it into a sealed jar. "Something is wrong with you," I said. "That should matter more than his feelings." She looked away. "You've never trusted him." There was truth in that. Enough to sting. Grant Hale had always been polished in a way that made me uneasy. He remembered birthdays, sent flowers after arguments, and used people's first names twice in every conversation, as if he had studied warmth from a manual. But he had also held Emily through 2 miscarriages, driven her to appointments, and sat beside her mother's bed during the final week of cancer. Whatever else I suspected, I could not pretend every kindness had been false. My own history gave Emily reasons to doubt me. I had missed school plays, forgotten parent conferences, and spent half her childhood inspecting factories across 3 states. After my wife, Margaret, died 4 years earlier, I tried to repay every absence with money. I gave Emily and Grant $180,000 toward the house. I covered fertility treatments insurance refused to touch. When Grant's consulting business hit trouble, I loaned him another $75,000 without collateral because Emily said the stress was hurting their marriage. Each check made me feel useful for a few days. Each one also gave me an excuse not to ask whether my daughter was happy. That morning, surrounded by broken glass and Grant's carefully portioned pills. I saw the cost of confusing support with closeness. Emily was defending her husband from me before I had accused him of anything. "I'm calling an ambulance," I said. She grabbed her phone first. "No, I'm calling Grant." Her thumb shook as she tapped his name. He answered before the first ring had finished. Emily put him on speaker, and his voice filled the kitchen with practiced calm. "Sweetheart, are you all right then?" Without pause, he asked. "Is your father in the kitchen?" I looked at the phone. Emily did not seem to notice the question. "I got dizzy," she said. "Dad wants to take me to the hospital." Grant exhaled slowly, the sound of a patient man dealing with a familiar problem. "You probably forgot breakfast again. Drink the smoothie and sit down for 10 minutes. My fingers closed around the folded warning in my pocket. "She already drank some," I said. There was a short silence. "Walter," Grant replied. "What exactly have you touched? Not, how is she? Not, is her heart racing? What have you touched?" I looked toward the organizer. One translucent capsule had rolled beneath the lip of the refrigerator, almost hidden in shadow. "Nothing," I said. Grant's tone softened. "Good. Please leave everything where it is." I'm turning around. The call ended. Emily stared at me as if I had broken a promise. "You make him nervous," she said. I crouched to pick up the larger pieces of glass. Using a dish towel, as I did, I palmed the fallen capsule and slipped it into the clean corner of the cloth. Grant returned 12 minutes later wearing a navy suit without a tie. His expression composed, except for a faint shine of sweat along his hairline. He moved directly to Emily, checked her forehead, then glanced over her shoulder at the counter. His eyes paused on the pill organizer long enough for me to notice. "You scared me," he told her, pulling her into his chest. Emily relaxed against him. That was the part that hurt. Whatever Grant was doing, she still saw safety when he entered the room. He turned to me. "Thank you for helping, Walt. I can handle it from here." I told him her pulse had been irregular. He said her cardiologist had already explained that anxiety could cause palpitations. I pointed to the capsules. "What's in those?" Grant picked up the vitamin bottle and handed it to me. The label listed magnesium, vitamin D, iron, and several herbs. "A nutrition specialist recommended them," he said. "Emily hasn't been sleeping since the miscarriages. We're trying something gentler than prescription drugs." His explanation was smooth, plausible, and delivered with just enough sadness to make suspicion look cruel. Emily stood with Grant's arm around her waist. "Dad, go home." I stared at her. "You nearly collapsed, and now I'm fine." She was not fine. Her pupils looked slightly unfocused, and she leaned more of her weight against Grant than she realized. But the expression on her face was unmistakable. She was not asking me to trust him. She was demanding that I stop making her choose. Grant rubbed her shoulder and said, "Walter has been under a lot of stress since Margaret passed. Sometimes fear comes out as control." He spoke gently, like a therapist naming an uncomfortable truth. Emily closed her eyes. I felt anger rise, hot and useless. But years of accident investigations had taught me what anger does to evidence. It contaminates the scene. It gives everyone a reason to remember your behavior instead of the facts. "You're right," I said, forcing my voice level. I overreacted. Grant's eyebrows lifted slightly. I placed the vitamin bottle back exactly where I had found it and folded the dish towel over the capsule in my pocket. At the front door, Grant followed me alone. "I know you love her," he said quietly, "but this constant suspicion is making her worse." I looked past him at Emily, now sitting at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around the untouched smoothie. "Then throw that drink away," I said. His smile disappeared for less than a second. "It's fruit, protein powder, and supplements. Nothing more." I nodded and stepped outside. He locked the door behind me. From the sidewalk, I glanced toward the faded Buick. The old man was gone, but I had memorized the Tennessee plate. I drove 2 blocks, parked beside a closed dry cleaner, and unfolded the warning again. A phone number had been written on the back. I called. A man answered on the fourth ring but said nothing. "You gave me the note," I said. "Who are you?" His breathing sounded rough. Finally, he replied, "Not over the phone. Kingston Diner. 20 minutes. Sit in the rear booth." Then he hung up. I looked at the capsule wrapped in the towel and decided not to call Grant, Emily, or the police not yet. The man was waiting beneath a framed photograph of the Smoky Mountains, both hands around a cup of coffee he had not touched. Up close, he looked older than 70, with deep creases around his mouth and a pharmacist's habit of studying people before speaking. "Harold Baines," he said. "I'm sorry I frightened you, but I couldn't risk telling your daughter while her husband was home." I sat across from him and placed the folded warning between us. "Start with how you know my daughter." Harold shook his head. "I don't. I know Grant Hale. He told me his daughter Laura had died 2 years earlier at Briar Glen, an assisted living facility outside Maryville. Grant had been hired to redesign medication and behavior management procedures after the facility received complaints. Laura suffered from early-onset dementia, but Harold said she had remained physically stable until she began appearing sedated during visits. "She forgot my name one afternoon," he said, staring at the coffee. 2 days later, she couldn't stand. A week after that, her heart stopped. They blamed her condition. Maybe they were right, but they never explained the unrecorded medication changes. Harold had been a licensed pharmacist for 37 years. After Laura's death, he filed complaints, requested records, and accused Briar Glen of chemical restraint. The facility denied wrongdoing. Grant testified that all changes had followed physician orders, and Harold became, in the official language, a grieving relative unable to accept a natural death. Then he saw Grant meeting a former Briar Glen nurse named Rebecca Sloan behind an abandoned pharmacy. She lost her license after the investigation. Harold said, "I recognized the bottles she handed him. Small amber vials. No pharmacy labels." He had followed Grant twice, not to my daughter's house at first, but to learn where the drugs went. 3 days earlier, he watched through the kitchen window as Grant opened capsules, emptied their contents, and refilled them with powder from one of those vials. "Maybe there's an innocent explanation," Harold said, "but today I saw him prepare her drink, lock the house, and leave. Your daughter was already moving like Laura did near the end." I placed the wrapped capsule on the table. Harold did not touch it. His face simply lost color. I spent the next hour doing what I had always done after a serious workplace incident, preserving the chain of evidence. I photographed the capsule without opening it, placed it in a clean plastic container purchased at a pharmacy, signed and dated a note describing where I found it, and drove to a private toxicology laboratory in Oak Ridge that accepted individual testing requests. The technician warned that the result would not be admissible in every legal setting because I had collected the sample myself. "I'm not building a criminal case," I said. "I'm trying to decide whether my daughter is safe." He promised a preliminary screening by evening. On the drive home, I called Emily twice. Both calls went to voicemail. At 4:30, she finally returned the call. Her speech sounded clearer, but anger had replaced the fog. "Grant told me you took something from our kitchen." I asked how he knew. She ignored the question. "You invaded our home." "Dad, you scared me when I was already vulnerable." I told her I had taken nothing important. It was my first direct lie to my daughter, and I hated how easily it came. Emily said she and Grant planned to sell the house after her 39th birthday and move to Nashville. I nearly missed the next turn. Since when I asked, we've discussed it for months. They had not mentioned it once, even though my home was 20 minutes away and I saw Emily most Sundays. She said Nashville would give Grant better business opportunities and allow them to start fresh. With the trust money, I asked. Silence followed. Margaret had created a trust after selling her interest in a medical equipment company. It held roughly $2.4 million, and under its terms, Emily would receive full control at 39. Until then, I served as temporary co-trustee with Dana Whitmore, our family attorney. "There it is," Emily said bitterly. "You always turn everything into money." She ended the call. I sat at my desk staring at a photograph of her at age 8, missing both front teeth, holding a model airplane we had built together during one of the few weekends I had not been traveling. I had spent years believing money could prove I had become a better father. Grant had learned how to use that shame against me. I opened my archived trust correspondence and searched Grant's name. At first, I found only routine messages about annual statements. Then, an email from 3 months earlier appeared, sent from Emily's account to Dana Whitmore. The subject line read, "Beneficiary Incapacity Provisions." The sender asked what documentation would be required if Emily became unable to manage financial decisions and whether a spouse holding durable power of attorney could act on her behalf. The wording was formal, filled with legal phrases Emily never used. Dana's reply stated that any determination would require medical evidence and strict review. I printed both messages and wrote down the dates. The first email had been sent at 5:42 a.m., a time when Emily was rarely awake. Before I could call Dana, my phone rang from an unfamiliar Oak Ridge number. The laboratory technician asked whether I was somewhere private. "The capsule is not a nutritional supplement," he said. "It contains a prescription sedative and an anti-anxiety medication. Combined, they can cause confusion, loss of coordination, respiratory suppression, and dangerous cardiac effects." I gripped the edge of my desk. Could one capsule kill her? He paused. With an underlying heart condition. Repeated exposure. I looked at Harold's warning, the email about incapacity, and the photograph of my daughter smiling before any man had taught her to doubt her own mind. Grant had not merely been hiding a financial problem or controlling his wife's schedule. Someone had been putting prescription drugs into Emily's vitamins while creating a written record that she was becoming mentally incompetent. I called Dana and told her not to contact Grant, not to email Emily's account, and not to mention my name until we spoke in person. Then I drove back toward Farragut, intending to remove my daughter whether she forgave me or not. Halfway there, a text arrived from Grant's number. It contained a photograph of the spare key I had used that morning, lying on his kitchen counter. Beneath it were 7 words, "You will not enter my house again." A second message followed before I could answer. "Emily has signed papers protecting her from you." I pulled onto the shoulder and read both texts twice. The danger was no longer something Grant might be planning. He had already begun. By the time I reached Emily's neighborhood, I had already decided that breaking through Grant's front door would be the fastest way to lose every advantage I still had. His text was designed to provoke exactly that. He wanted an angry father on the porch, pounding the glass, shouting about poison while his frightened daughter watched from inside. One call to the police, one body camera recording, and I would become the unstable widower Grant had apparently been describing for months. So I parked 2 streets away and called Dana Whitmore instead. She had handled Margaret's estate, drafted Emily's trust, and spent 30 years explaining bad decisions to wealthy families in calm sentences. When I told her about the laboratory result, the incapacity email, and Grant's message claiming Emily had signed protective papers, she did not gasp. Dana rarely wasted breath on reactions. "Do not go to the house," she said. "Do not threaten him. Email me the report. Preserve the original capsule container, and meet me at my office in 45 minutes. Then she added, "Walter, if he is building a record, every emotional response you give him becomes another brick." Dana's office overlooked downtown Knoxville from the 6th floor of an old bank building. All dark wood, muted carpet, and framed diplomas that seemed to promise the law could impose order on anything. I laid the warning note, printed emails, laboratory report, and photographs across her conference table. She read every page twice. "This screening is useful, but not enough by itself," she said. "The capsule came from a home you entered with a valid key, but Grant will argue contamination, mistake, or theft. We need Emily tested by a medical provider who has no relationship with him." I told her Emily would refuse. Dana folded her hands. "Then we cannot force her unless she lacks capacity. And proving that would hand Grant the argument he wants." She opened the trust agreement and pointed to a section I had not read since Margaret's funeral. When Emily turned 39, my temporary authority would end automatically. If she signs a durable power of attorney before then, Dana explained, Grant could manage her personal finances. He cannot simply seize the trust, but with the right medical opinion and enough access, he could control distributions, sell jointly owned assets, and isolate her from anyone who objects. I asked whether the papers Grant mentioned could keep me away from Emily. Dana said he might have persuaded her to sign a no-contact request, a medical privacy authorization excluding me, or even a petition claiming harassment. None of those would erase my rights under the trust, but they could make me look dangerous if I ignored them. She searched her case management system and found the email Grant had sent from Emily's account 3 months earlier. He asked specifically about incapacity language. She said, at the time, I assumed Emily was planning responsibly. I replied to her address and copied no one. Dana's mouth tightened. That was my mistake. I told her Grant's language did not sound like Emily. Suspicion is not proof. She replied, from now on, we document facts. She instructed me to create a written timeline beginning with Emily's first symptoms. Every loan I had made, every conversation about moving, and the exact condition of the kitchen that morning. Before I left, Dana placed the warning note in a clear evidence sleeve. The old man may be credible, she said, but until we verify his claims, he is also a stranger who admitted following your son-in-law. The next morning, I drove to Emily's house only long enough to place my spare key in a padded envelope and send it by certified mail from the post office. I photographed the key, the sealed envelope, and the receipt. Then I texted Emily, I am returning the key. I will respect your space. I love you, and I am here when you are ready. No accusation, no mention of Grant, no demand that she call me. It was the hardest message I had ever written, because every fatherly instinct told me silence was cowardice. Grant responded 30 minutes later from Emily's phone. Thank you for finally respecting our boundaries. The wording was his. Emily never used boundaries without sounding like she was quoting someone. I did not answer. Instead, I began the timeline Dana requested. Dates revealed what memory had blurred. Emily's dizziness started shortly after Grant's company closed its downtown office. Her missed Sunday dinners increased after the trust's annual statement arrived. She began forgetting conversations around the same time Grant started preparing her breakfast every morning. Separately, each fact had an innocent explanation. Together, they formed the outline of a plan. Grant did not wait for my silence to protect him. 2 days later, a retired engineer named Paul Denton called and asked whether I was feeling all right. Paul and I had worked together at 3 manufacturing plants, and he was not a man who made social calls. Why wouldn't I be? I asked. He hesitated. Grant told Susan you've been struggling since Margaret died. Said you've become fixated on their marriage and accused him of drugging Emily. Susan was Paul's wife and a member of the same church committee as Grant. I asked whether Grant had mentioned the laboratory report. No, Paul said, just that you took pills from their house and scared Emily. I thanked him and wrote down the conversation. By evening, 2 relatives had left careful voicemails asking whether I needed help. Grant was not defending himself privately. He was preparing witnesses. The more people who believed I was grieving, intrusive, and unstable, the less believable I would sound when I eventually said my daughter was being poisoned. I had spent 40 years teaching supervisors that reputational damage often precedes a cover-up. People decide who is credible before they ever see the evidence. Emily finally answered my call on the 4th day, but Grant was beside her. I could hear his breathing near the phone. I told her I wanted to bring the laboratory report and talk somewhere public. There's nothing to discuss, she said. Her voice was clearer than before, though strangely flat. Grant spoke in the background, too softly for me to catch the words. Emily continued. The capsule was from an old prescription. It must have fallen into the vitamin container when Grant cleaned the bathroom cabinet. I asked why an old prescription had been opened and repackaged. Grant took the phone. Because I separated medications months ago when Emily was having trouble sleeping. You found 1 capsule on the floor and invented a crime. I reminded him that the capsule contained 2 controlled medications in the same shell. He said the lab could have made a mistake. Then his tone became gentle. Walt, Emily is afraid of you right now. She thinks you are going to use the trust to punish her for staying with me. I heard Emily say, "That's not what I said." Grant answered, "It's what you meant." The correction was quiet, almost tender, and more revealing than any confession. I made my own mistake then. "Emily, pack a bag and leave that house now," I said. "I will pick you up wherever you choose." She went silent. Grant did not need to defend himself because I had just confirmed his story about me. "You hear that," Emily said. "You don't ask what I want. You decide." I tried to explain that danger changed the rules, but she cut me off. "When Mom was sick, you decided which doctors we should trust. When Grant's company struggled, you decided how much money would fix it. When I wanted to move, you called it a mistake before I finished the sentence." Each accusation contained enough truth to hold me still. "I am not a child," she said. "Stop treating me like one." Then Grant returned. Sounding reasonable, he proposed that the three of us meet with a family therapist. "Not your lawyer," he added. "A neutral profesional." I knew exactly how that meeting would look. Grant calm, Emily wounded, and me holding a toxicology report like a weapon. I said I would consider it. Emily ended the call without saying she loved me. That afternoon, Dana found a public filing that changed the shape of Grant's motive. His consulting firm, Hale Care Solutions, had defaulted on a commercial loan personally guaranteed for $620,000. The lender had filed suit and scheduled a hearing for mid-June. Grant had told us his company was expanding into Nashville. In reality, the office lease had been terminated 2 months earlier. His website listed employees who no longer worked there, and 2 clients were suing over unfinished contracts. "He needs money before Emily's birthday," Dana said. I asked whether the trust could satisfy his debt. "Not directly," she replied. "Margaret structured it as Emily's separate property. But if Emily voluntarily distributes funds, signs guarantees, or gives him authority over accounts after receiving control, he could reach the money through her." Dana also discovered a home equity application linked to Emily and Grant's house. It had not closed, but the requested amount was $190,000. "The lender is still waiting for verification from Emily," she said. "Someone may be trying to create liquidity from every available source." I met Harold Baines again at Kingston Diner, this time with Dana's investigator present. Harold brought a folder thick with pharmacy printouts, facility correspondence, and handwritten dates. His daughter Laura had lived at Briar Glen for 11 months before her death. The facility treated residents with dementia, but Harold believed staff had used sedatives to reduce complaints and staffing demands. Grant's consulting firm had written a behavior stabilization protocol during that period. The document used acceptable medical language, yet medication records showed several residents became increasingly sedated after Grant's recommendations were implemented. "I never proved he ordered anything illegal," Harold admitted. "He was careful. Physicians signed the charts. Nurses administered the doses. Rebecca Sloan had worked the night shift and later been disciplined for incomplete medication logs." Harold showed us photographs of Grant meeting her behind the abandoned pharmacy. The images were grainy, but one clearly showed Rebecca handing him a small paper bag. Dana's investigator asked why Harold had not taken the photographs to police. "I did," he said. "They said 2 adults exchanging a bag is not a crime." Harold's bitterness was understandable. But Dana was right. Grief could sharpen observation or distort it. Before we left, Harold mentioned something that did not appear in his notes. 3 weeks earlier, he had seen Grant carrying a clear plastic organizer from his car into Emily's house. "One of those weekly pill boxes," he said. "Blue lids, white base." It matched the organizer on the kitchen counter. He had also seen Rebecca's car parked near the house twice after midnight. The investigator wrote down the dates. I asked Harold why he risked warning me instead of continuing to collect evidence. He looked toward the window, where rain had begun tracing thin lines down the glass. "Because Laura asked me for help once," he said. "She told me the pills made her feel like she was disappearing. I told her the doctors knew what they were doing." He swallowed before continuing. "I wanted proof more than I wanted to believe her. By the time I believed her, she was dead." His confession silenced me. I had spent the past 4 days demanding proof, because proof was safer than fear. For the first time, I understood that waiting for certainty could also be a decision. Dana's investigator confirmed Rebecca Sloane's nursing license had been suspended, then allowed to expire. Her current address belonged to a small apartment complex in Alcoa, but no one answered the door. Public records showed her younger brother owned a company called RLS Patient Logistics. When Dana traced Grant's business payments, she found 12 transfers to that company over 6 months, totaling $48,000. The descriptions read, records review, transport consultation, and compliance support. RLS had no website, no listed employees, and no state contracts. The connection was suggestive, not conclusive, but it gave the photographs context. Grant had not met Rebecca once by accident. He had been sending money to a company tied to her family. Dana warned me not to contact Rebecca directly. If she is involved, she may destroy evidence or alert Grant. She said, if she is innocent, approaching her could become another harassment claim. I hated how every reasonable move required patience. Grant was sleeping under the same roof as Emily while we assembled folders. Yet patience was the only thing keeping us from handing him control of the story. The first person to give me information from inside Emily's life was her friend Nicole Reeves. Nicole had known Emily since college and worked as an occupational therapist at a rehabilitation clinic. We met in a coffee shop near her office. She looked exhausted before we began. Grant told me not to talk to you, she said. He said you were trying to have Emily declared incompetent so you could keep her money. I showed her the laboratory report, but not Harold's accusations. Nicole read it twice and covered her mouth. She said Emily had canceled 4 lunch dates in 2 months, forgotten a client deadline, and repeated the same story 3 times during a single phone call. Grant always explained that grief, hormones, or anxiety were affecting her. She started letting him answer her messages. Nicole said, at first it seemed sweet. Then I realized I never knew when I was speaking to her. 2 weeks earlier, Emily had sent Nicole a message at 213 a.m. If I forget again, remind me the box is only Mom's box. The message disappeared minutes later. Emily later claimed it was meant for someone else. I knew the box immediately. Margaret had owned a cedar sewing box with a faded blue lining and a brass clasp shaped like a leaf. After she died, Emily took it home and placed it in her upstairs studio. Margaret never stored anything valuable inside. Only needles, buttons, thread, and old photographs. Did Emily ever explain what she meant? I asked. Nicole shook her head. She became nervous and changed the subject. Grant walked into the room while we were talking. Dana believed Emily might have hidden documents, medication, or notes there, but I had returned my key and could not legally enter the house. Nicole offered to visit Emily, but Grant had already canceled their plans twice. We decided not to tell her about the box yet. Instead, I went through old photographs until I found one of Margaret sitting beside it on our dining table. I sent the image to Emily with a simple message. Found this today. Thought you might want it. No code. No accusation. Just a memory she would understand if the late-night text had meant what we hoped. The message showed as read at 3:07 the next morning. Emily did not respond, but Grant called after breakfast. His voice was cordial, almost cheerful. I think we both want the same thing, he said. Emily needs stability. He proposed an agreement. I would approve the sale of the house, stop questioning her medical care, and support the move to Nashville. In exchange, he would encourage Emily to keep me involved with the trust after her birthday. I asked why my approval mattered if the house belonged to them. Because you contributed the down payment, he said. Emily feels guilty moving forward without your blessing. That was not the real reason. He wanted my signature on something, or at least proof that I accepted the plan. Send the proposal through Dana, I replied. Grant laughed softly. Must everything go through lawyers? I told him important financial decisions should. His tone cooled. Your obsession with control is exactly what is hurting her. I let the accusation pass. Send the papers, I said. After the call, Dana told me to appear cooperative. If Grant believed I was considering his offer, he might reveal what he needed and when. The document arrived that afternoon. It was not merely consent to sell the house. Attached was a draft agreement stating that Grant would become Emily's primary financial agent if a physician determined she lacked capacity, while I would resign from any continuing advisory role. Buried in the supporting materials was a letter Grant had written to a neurologist. It listed incidents of confusion leaving the stove on, forgetting contracts, repeating conversations, becoming suspicious of medication, and leaving home without explanation. Each event was dated. The first entry came 2 days after Grant's earliest payment to RLS Patient Logistics. The final paragraph requested a formal capacity evaluation before Emily's 39th birthday, because significant assets will soon come under her sole control. Dana placed the pages side by side with my timeline. The pattern was unmistakable. The symptoms had not merely appeared while Grant prepared for financial control. He had recorded them as they developed, building a medical story around the effects of whatever Emily was swallowing. I was still reading when Nicole called from her car. She had driven past Emily's house after work and seen an ambulance parked outside. Grant stood on the lawn speaking to a paramedic while Emily sat in the open doorway wrapped in a blanket. Nicole stopped half a block away, but Grant noticed her and waved the ambulance off before she could approach. 10 minutes later, Emily texted Nicole that she had suffered another panic attack and needed rest. I called Emily. No answer. I called Grant. He answered and said, "This is what your pressure is doing to her." I asked why the ambulance left without taking her to a hospital. "Because she stabilized," he said. Then he added, "A doctor will evaluate her tomorrow. And once we have that report, your interference ends." After he hung up, Dana forwarded one final attachment from the neurologist's office. Grant had already scheduled an expedited capacity assessment and listed himself as the only authorized family contact. The betrayal was no longer a single capsule, a hidden debt, or one forged email. It was a coordinated timeline, and tomorrow Grant intended to turn the symptoms he had created into legal control. Emily called me at 618 the next morning from a gas station payphone off Pellissippi Parkway. I almost ignored the unfamiliar number because I had spent the night answering calls from relatives who wanted to know whether grief had made me dangerous. Then I heard my daughter whisper, "Dad, don't say my name." Her voice was thin but alert. She said Grant had taken her phone after the ambulance left and told her she needed uninterrupted sleep before the neurological evaluation. At 3 in the morning, she woke fully dressed on top of the bed with no memory of lying down. The photograph I had sent was open on her tablet. "I remembered Mom's box," she said. She waited until Grant showered, slipped out through the garage, and walked nearly a mile before a clerk let her use the phone. "I don't know whether I'm sick or losing my mind," she said, "but I found something, and Grant knows I found it." I told her to stay inside beneath the security camera. Then I drove faster than I had since Margaret entered hospice. Emily stood beside the coffee machine wearing sweatpants, one of Grant's old college sweatshirts, and no coat. Her hands were trembling. She flinched when my truck stopped, then looked past me to make sure I was alone. I opened the passenger door but did not touch her. "Where do you want to go?" I asked. It was the first time in days I had phrased anything as her choice. She looked surprised. "Not your house," she said. "He'll check there." I suggested a hospital outside Grant's usual medical network. Emily nodded and climbed in. Halfway to Oak Ridge, she began crying without sound. "I accused you of trying to control me," she said. "Maybe you were right about everything." I told her I was right about some things and wrong about others. "We can sort out blame later. Right now, we need facts." She stared through the windshield. "That sounds like you." There was no affection in the remark, but no anger either. It sounded like someone reaching for a familiar railing in the dark. At the emergency department, Emily told the intake nurse she believed someone had given her medication without consent. The words made her look ashamed, as if naming the possibility were a betrayal. The physician ordered a toxicology screen, cardiac monitoring, and blood work. Grant called my phone 6 times while we waited. I silenced every call and handed the device to Dana, who arrived before noon carrying a leather folder and the expression she wore when the facts had finally become worse than her caution. The preliminary screen detected a sedative and an anti-anxiety medication in Emily's blood. She had not filled either prescription in 11 months. Her heart rhythm showed frequent irregular beats, not immediately life-threatening, but dangerous, in combination with repeated dosing. The physician asked whether she had taken supplements, teas, powders, or prepared drinks. Emily described the vitamins and smoothies. Then she covered her face and said, "My husband makes them." The room became quiet. Dana asked the physician to document those exact words and to note that Emily was oriented, coherent, and capable of making her own medical decisions. Once we were alone, Emily asked whether Grant had tried to kill her. I wanted to say yes because rage prefers certainty, but certainty was something Grant had been manufacturing for months. "I don't know what he intended," I said. "I know he exposed you to drugs without your informed consent. That is enough to get you out." She looked down at the hospital bracelet. "He knew about my heart." Then she began talking, slowly at first, as if opening one locked room at a time. 6 weeks earlier, she had discovered a withdrawal from their joint account to a company called RLS Patient Logistics. Grant told her it was a subcontractor. 2 weeks later, she found a draft power of attorney in the printer tray, granting him broad authority over banking, property sales, medical decisions, and digital accounts. When she confronted him, he said Dana had recommended it because Emily was under too much stress. Emily believed him until she emailed Dana and received no reply. Dana checked her records. No such email had ever reached her office. Someone had deleted it from Emily's sent folder before delivery. Emily had started documenting the gaps in her memory. She wrote down when she became dizzy, what she ate, who she spoke with, and which tasks she could not remember completing. The first notebook vanished after Grant cleaned her studio. He said she must have misplaced it. She began a second record on loose pages and hid them beneath the blue fabric lining of Margaret's sewing box. She also printed bank statements, the unsigned power of attorney, and copies of messages Grant had exchanged with a lender. "I knew something was wrong," she said, "but every time I found evidence, he had an explanation. Then I would lose another hour or forget another conversation, and I started thinking maybe he was right about me." The message to Nicole had been a safeguard. Emily had typed it during one clear period, then deleted it when Grant entered the room. "I wanted someone to remember the box if I couldn't," she said. "I just didn't expect him to read over my shoulder." That explained the late-night message, the photograph, and why Grant suddenly seemed determined to keep everyone away from the house. Dana asked why Emily had never called me. My daughter's answer hurt because it was not cruel. Grant said Dad wanted me declared incompetent so he could keep controlling the trust. He showed me old emails where Dad questioned my decisions. She looked at me. "You did question them." I remembered messages about her wedding budget, the house, fertility treatments, and Grant's business loan. Every one had been written as advice and received as judgment. "I thought protecting you meant preventing mistakes," I said. "Sometimes it meant making sure you never got to own them." Emily's eyes filled, but she did not look away. Grant had not invented my controlling instincts. He had taken real wounds and widened them until they became a wall between us. That realization did not reduce his guilt. It explained how he had managed to isolate her so efficiently. Predators do not always create weakness. Sometimes they study the cracks already there and learn which ones will open with pressure. The financial documents revealed a second layer to Grant's plan. 6 months earlier, before the drugs and the medical evaluations, Emily had offered to use part of her future inheritance to save his company. She showed us an email she had preserved in a cloud folder for illustration projects. In it, she promised Grant that once the trust transferred, they would wipe out the business debt and start over together. Dana had later explained that the trust could not distribute funds early for that purpose. Emily became frightened by the amount Grant owed and withdrew her promise. Grant never forgave her. "He said I had humiliated him in front of you," Emily recalled. "He said your refusal proved you never considered him family. The money was not merely a rescue plan anymore." To Grant, controlling the trust had become proof that he was no longer the dependent son-in-law Walt Mercer could approve or deny. His pride, fear, and debt had fused into entitlement. He had begun treating Emily's inheritance as compensation for every slight he believed he had endured. The loan application for $190,000 carried Emily's electronic signature, but she had never authorized it. The lender had paused the transaction after failing to verify her directly. That explained why Grant needed her cooperative. Impaired, or legally represented before the middle of June, the house itself had become another source of cash. If he sold it, accessed the equity, and controlled trust distributions after her birthday, he could satisfy enough creditors to keep his company's collapse out of public view. Emily read the application and said, "He used the password I made from Mom's birthday. I asked whether Grant knew it. He knew everything." She replied, "He said married people shouldn't have secrets." The irony would have sounded bitter from anyone else. From Emily, it sounded exhausted. Dana photographed every document and had Emily sign a statement identifying which signatures were genuine and which were not. She also prepared an immediate revocation of any power of attorney Grant might already possess. Emily signed it without hesitation. We moved Emily to a private observation room under restricted visitor status. She authorized Dana, Nicole, and me to receive information, but specifically excluded Grant. Dana arranged for a psychiatrist unaffiliated with the neurological practice Grant had selected to evaluate her capacity. Emily knew the date, location, value of the trust, terms of the house ownership, and exact reason she wanted to revoke financial authority. She was frightened and medicated, but not incompetent. The psychiatrist documented that her confusion was consistent with drug exposure rather than a progressive cognitive disorder. By late afternoon, we had enough to protect her temporarily. What we did not have was the evidence from the sewing box. Emily insisted the originals mattered because they included handwritten notes, printed timestamps, and a list of each occasion Grant prepared her supplements. "There's also a copy of the messages with the lender," she said. "I printed them because I was afraid he would delete the account." Dana recommended retrieving the box with a civil standby rather than risking an unlawful entry. Emily agreed. She wanted to face the house while she could still remember why she had left. The next morning, a Knox County deputy met us outside the property. Grant opened the door wearing a pale gray sweater and the expression of a man welcoming guests to a difficult family discussion. He did not appear surprised to see Emily. "I've been worried sick," he said. She stepped behind the deputy when he reached for her. Grant let his hand fall. Dana explained that Emily was retrieving clothing, personal records, and sentimental property. The deputy made clear he was there only to prevent conflict, not search the home. Grant nodded. "Of course. This is her house, too." His courtesy was so complete that I understood why everyone believed him. We went upstairs to the studio. Margaret's sewing box sat on the desk beneath the window, precisely where Emily had left it. For one hopeful second, I thought Grant had missed it. Then Emily lifted the lid. The blue lining had been cut along 3 sides. The documents were gone. A few spools of thread had been arranged over the torn fabric like props in a photograph. Emily swayed, and I put out a hand but stopped before touching her. She steadied herself on the desk. Grant stood in the doorway. "Looking for something?" he asked. The deputy turned toward him, and Grant raised both hands. "I'm only asking. She's been hiding things and forgetting where she put them," Emily said. "You found the papers." Grant's face softened with concern. "What papers?" He glanced at the deputy. "This is what I've been trying to explain. She creates stories when she is frightened." Then he produced his phone and played an audio recording. My own voice filled the studio. "You are not thinking clearly enough to make this decision." The sentence came from a call nearly 2 years earlier. After Emily drank too much on the anniversary of her second miscarriage and tried to drive home, Grant had removed every surrounding word. In isolation, it sounded like a father declaring permanent authority over an unstable daughter. "He has dozens of recordings like that," Emily whispered. Grant replied, "Because I needed proof of how he talks to you." Dana told him the recording's context could be established. Grant smiled without humor. Context is what powerful men call the parts they expect everyone else to ignore. It was a clever line, and I hated that part of it was true. He turned to Emily. "Your father has spent your entire life making decisions and calling it love. Now he is using your fear to take you away from your husband. Emily asked again where the documents were. Grant said no such papers existed. The deputy could not compel him to produce property we could not prove was there. We packed clothes, a laptop, and the damaged sewing box. As we left, Grant called after Emily. You don't have to do this. She paused at the bottom of the stairs. You put drugs in my body. Grant's expression changed for the first time. Not guilt, calculation. That is what he told you, he said. Emily walked out without answering. Rebecca Sloan had vanished from her apartment by the time Dana's investigator returned with a process server. Her landlord said she had left during the night, taking 2 suitcases and abandoning the rest of her belongings. Grant had either warned her or frightened her. Harold blamed himself for being seen near the house. But the more likely explanation was that Grant had monitored Emily's phone, email, or cloud accounts. Dana ordered all passwords changed from a secure device. Emily's illustration folder contained photographs of several documents, though not every page. Among them was a screenshot of a message from Grant to an unnamed recipient. I need the pattern consistent before the appointment. The number was partially visible, enough for investigators to connect later if legal process allowed. Another photograph showed the home equity application and Grant's handwritten note signed before 6/14. The copies proved Emily had not imagined the documents. They did not yet prove who supplied the drugs or whether Grant personally placed them in her vitamins. We had enough to defend her, but perhaps not enough to stop him from turning the conflict into a battle over her mental health. That evening, Grant filed an emergency petition requesting a psychiatric evaluation and temporary protective authority over Emily. He alleged that she had abruptly abandoned the marital home, stopped taking prescribed medication, become paranoid about poisoning, and fallen under the influence of a grieving father with a history of controlling behavior. Attached were the edited recording, statements from 2 relatives who had heard I was unstable, and a letter from the neurologist Grant had contacted. The physician did not declare Emily incompetent, but recommended immediate assessment based on Grant's reports. Dana called the petition aggressive, but not impossible to counter. The hospital evaluation helps us, she said, but emergency systems are designed to act first when someone claims imminent danger. Emily looked at me. Can he have me committed? Dana answered carefully. Not permanently, but he may be able to trigger a short evaluation if authorities believe you are at risk. Emily's face went still. Grant had taken the symptoms he caused and converted them into a legal weapon exactly as we feared. The deputies arrived at Nicole's house shortly after midnight with an order authorizing a 72-hour evaluation. Dana argued by phone, then in person. But the order had been signed, and resisting would only strengthen Grant's claim. Emily packed a small bag while Nicole cried in the kitchen. I stood near the front door, feeling every part of me demand action. I could block the hallway. I could shout. I could tell the deputies they were carrying my daughter back into the trap. Instead, I asked Emily what she wanted me to do. She took a long breath. Stay calm, she said. Don't give him what he wants. Then she handed me Margaret's damaged sewing box. The photographs are in the cloud. The originals are gone. But not everything is gone. The deputies escorted her to the vehicle. At the treatment center, Grant had already registered himself as her spouse and primary contact. My name had been removed. Through the glass doors, I saw him standing beneath the fluorescent lights, waiting. He walked toward me while the staff processed Emily behind a locked security desk. You should go home, Walt, he said. His voice was low enough that no one else could hear. She needs professionals now. I told him the toxicology results would expose him. He did not flinch. A private test on a pill you stole, a blood screen after she spent the night with you. You have no idea how this looks. He was right about one thing. Every fact could be twisted if presented by the wrong person at the wrong time. Grant stepped closer, his face calm and almost sympathetic. You have spent years proving you don't trust her judgment, he said. All I had to do was let people notice. Then he looked through the glass at Emily and added, You just helped me confirm every warning I gave them about you. The locked doors closed between us. For the first time since Harold handed me the note, I understood that saving my daughter would require more than proving Grant had drugged her. I would have to defeat the version of me he had built from my own worst mistakes. I did not sleep after the treatment center locked its doors between Emily and me. I sat in Dana's conference room until sunrise, drinking coffee that tasted like burnt metal while she filed an emergency response to Grant's petition. The easiest mistake would have been to demand immediate access, threaten lawsuits, and accuse every nurse of helping him. That was the version of Walter Mercer Grant had prepared everyone to see. So I signed nothing in anger and spoke only when Dana asked a question. We submitted Emily's toxicology report, the independent psychiatrist's assessment, her written revocation of financial authority, and photographs recovered from her cloud folder. Dana requested that the facility conduct its own drug screening before allowing Grant to influence treatment. The order gives them 72 hours to evaluate her. She said, "It does not give him ownership of her mind." I stared at the damaged sewing box on the table. Its torn blue lining looked like an open wound. Grant believed destroying the papers had erased Emily's resistance. He did not know my daughter had already chosen to leave a trail. By 10 that morning, the facility's physician had reviewed Emily's hospital records and ordered another toxicology screen. The medications were still present in declining concentrations, supporting recent repeated exposure rather than a single dose after she left Grant. Emily answered every orientation question correctly. She knew the date, the president, her address, the approximate value of her trust, and the purpose of the evaluation. When asked why she believed her husband had drugged her, she described the vitamins, the hidden documents, the laboratory test, and the forged loan application without exaggeration. Grant requested a private meeting with the physician and tried to provide additional recordings of me. The physician refused to discuss Emily without her authorization. Dana later told me Grant's composure cracked for the first time. He demanded to know how a confused patient could revoke spousal access. The physician replied that confusion was not the same as incapacity. 49 hours after Emily entered the facility, she walked out through the same glass doors carrying her own discharge papers. Grant was waiting in the parking lot. Emily did not look at him. Nicole drove Emily to her house while Dana and I remained near the entrance. Grant approached me with his hands in his coat pockets. "You think this proves something?" he asked. I said nothing. He looked toward Nicole's car. "She'll come back. She always does when things become difficult." The confidence in his voice was not entirely arrogance. For years, Emily had turned to him after conflicts with me, after professional disappointments, and after every medical loss. He had learned to mistake dependence for loyalty. "I want to end this without destroying her," he continued. "Approve the house sale. Step away from the trust. Let us handle our marriage privately." I asked him to put the proposal in writing. He studied my face. "You're considering it." I let my shoulders sag. "I'm tired, Grant." That much was true. Maybe I have made things worse. His expression softened with satisfaction he tried to hide. "Finally," he said, "then let's stop fighting." I watched him walk away, believing he had moved me one step closer to surrender. The next afternoon, I called Grant and gave him exactly the story he wanted. I told him the treatment center had made me reconsider whether my fear had become control. I said Emily needed stability more than accusations and that perhaps I should resign from any advisory role after her birthday. I also said I would support selling the house if the transaction protected her. Grant remained cautious. "What changed?" he asked. I looked at the framed photograph of Margaret on my desk and answered, "I nearly lost my daughter by refusing to listen." He heard confession where I intended bait. Within an hour, his attorney emailed Dana a proposed family settlement. It required me to approve the sale, withdraw objections to Grant's management of Emily's finances, and acknowledge that I had contributed to her emotional instability. In return, Grant would allow supervised contact and refrain from seeking a longer guardianship evaluation. Dana read the document and said, "He is asking you to write his defense for him." I replied, "Then let him believe I might." We requested a formal meeting to discuss every provision. With all parties in council present, Emily did not like the plan when we explained it. She paced across Nicole's living room, pale with anger. "You want me to sit across from him and pretend I might go back?" she asked. Dana said she would never be asked to return home or sign anything without review. The purpose was to make Grant explain why he needed authority, why the house had to be sold quickly, and why the trust mattered before her birthday. Emily looked at me. "And you're going to pretend you believe him?" I nodded. "Only if you want to continue." She turned toward the window and remained silent for almost a minute. In the past, I would have filled that silence with arguments until she agreed. This time, I waited. Finally, she said, "I don't want you making the decision for me." I told her I understood. "Then here is my decision." She said, "We do it." But I ask the questions. He has spent months speaking for me. At the meeting, he answers to me. Dana agreed. That was the moment the plan stopped being mine. Before any meeting could occur, we had to protect what Grant could still reach. Emily contacted the bank and removed his online access to her separate accounts. Dana notified the trust administrator of a suspected fraud attempt and requested enhanced identity verification for every communication. Because Emily had not yet received full control, Grant could not withdraw trust assets, but he had been collecting information through her email. We changed passwords, recovery numbers, security questions, and cloud permissions from a clean laptop. The trust administrator placed a verbal passphrase known only to Emily. Grant would not be informed of the phrase or the security review. We also notified the lender handling the home equity application that Emily disputed the signature and did not authorize the loan. The lender froze the file pending investigation. Each action closed a door Grant believed was still open. We did not cancel the proposed house sale outright. That would have warned him we were preparing a trap. Instead, Dana told his attorney we were reviewing title, debt, and distribution issues before giving preliminary consent. Grant retaliated within 24 hours. He withdrew $84,000 from the joint checking and savings accounts, leaving only enough to cover 1 week of automatic payments. Because his name was legally on both accounts, the bank could not immediately reverse the transfers. He stopped the mortgage payment and canceled the insurance draft on Emily's car. Then he emailed 3 of her publishing clients, claiming she was taking an indefinite medical leave due to severe psychiatric symptoms. 2 clients suspended active contracts. A third demanded repayment of an advance. Emily read the messages at Nicole's kitchen table and went completely still. "He isn't just taking money," she said. "He's making sure no one trusts me to work." I offered to cover the mortgage, the insurance, and the advance. The words were out before I recognized the old pattern. Emily shook her head. "No, Dana can help me document the damage, and I can negotiate with the publishers myself." I started to argue, then stopped. She looked at me and said, "I don't need you to buy my life back. I need you beside me while I take it back." That sentence changed the way I understood our strategy. I had been treating the conflict like an industrial failure. Identify the hazard, isolate the source, control the damage. But Emily was not a system I could repair. Grant had taken advantage of her dependence because both of us had helped build it, he through manipulation, me through rescue. I transferred no money that day. Instead, I sat beside her while she called each publisher. She disclosed that she had experienced unauthorized medication exposure and was under medical care, but remained competent and available. One editor restored her contract after receiving a letter from her physician. Another refused, citing schedule risk. Emily accepted the loss without asking me to intervene. Later, she contacted the mortgage company herself, explained the marital dispute, and arranged a temporary payment from her separate account. Each call exhausted her, yet each decision returned something Grant had tried to erase. By evening, she looked stronger than she had in months, not because the drugs were leaving her body, though they were, but because no one was deciding what she could handle. Harold called that night from outside a motel near the airport. He had located Rebecca Sloane's car behind the building after checking several addresses connected to her brother. Dana's investigator told him not to approach her, but Harold was already in the lobby when we reached him. Rebecca had refused to speak and threatened to call the police. Harold looked ashamed. I thought if she heard Laura's name, she might tell the truth. I understood the impulse too well. Dana's investigator asked the clerk to deliver Rebecca a business card with a handwritten message: "You are not required to speak. Your own attorney may contact us regarding evidence preservation." No threats, no promises. We waited in the parking lot. 40 minutes later, a lawyer from Maryville called Dana. Rebecca had contacted him after receiving the card. She wanted to know whether Grant had blamed her. Dana replied that she could not offer immunity or legal advice, but that records showed payments connected to Rebecca's family company. The lawyer requested time to review the situation. It was not cooperation, but it was the first crack in Grant's silence. 2 days later, Rebecca's attorney provided a limited written statement to investigators. Rebecca admitted selling prescription sedatives to Grant, though she initially believed he intended to use them himself. After several purchases, he paid her to empty capsules and refill them so they resembled supplements. He told her the medication was for a family member who refused treatment and needed help sleeping. Rebecca claimed she did not know about Emily's heart condition and never entered the Hale home. She also admitted the payments to RLS Patient Logistics were disguised compensation. Her statement did not absolve her. She had distributed controlled medication illegally and deliberately concealed it, but it established the supply chain. More importantly, she preserved text messages and payment records because Grant still owed her $12,000. She refused to give us the contents directly, but her attorney agreed to provide them to law enforcement under proper process. Dana said that was enough. "We do not need Rebecca to become a hero," she told Harold. "We need her records to remain intact." The evidence we already possessed grew stronger when I remembered the doorbell camera. I had purchased the system as a housewarming gift and paid for the cloud subscription through an annual charge on my credit card. Grant had changed the locks but never changed the camera account because the device was registered under Emily's email with my billing information. With Emily's written permission, we accessed the archived footage. Most clips showed deliveries, neighbors, and Grant leaving for work that no longer existed. Then we found Rebecca. On 3 evenings, matching Harold's notes, her car stopped near the curb after dark. One recording showed Grant stepping outside, taking a small paper bag through the passenger window, and carrying it inside. Another clip from the morning Harold warned me showed Grant leaving the house with the blue and white pill organizer, walking to his SUV, and returning 7 minutes later with it concealed beneath a file folder. The camera did not reveal what he placed inside, but the sequence matched the capsule, Rebecca's statement, and Emily's symptoms. We downloaded the original files, preserved metadata, and provided copies to investigators. Grant discovered Harold's involvement when his attorney obtained photographs from the earlier complaint. He sent Harold a cease and desist letter accusing him of stalking, defamation, and harassment. The letter demanded that Harold surrender every photograph and stop contacting anyone connected to Grant. Harold called me ready to abandon everything. "He'll take my house," he said. "I can't afford another legal fight." Dana explained that a demand letter was not a court order and that Harold's lawful observations from public areas could be preserved. Still, his fear was real. Grant had targeted the thing Harold valued most, the modest stability he had left. I told Harold he was free to step away and that we already had enough to continue. He studied me across Dana's conference table. "That is what I told myself after Laura died," he said, "that I had done enough." He opened his folder and handed over 3 months of dated notes, fuel receipts, photographs, and the original memory card from his camera. "I'm not following him anymore," he said, "but I'm not giving him my silence either." While we prepared for the meeting, Grant damaged one part of our plan. He filed for legal separation and requested exclusive use of the marital home, claiming Emily had abandoned the property. He also listed the $84,000 as funds reserved for household expenses and legal fees. The filing meant we could no longer treat the proposed sale as a simple family decision. It would require disclosure and court oversight. Grant's attorney then postponed the meeting, arguing that financial issues should wait until Emily completed further treatment. Dana responded with Emily's discharge papers and demanded that Grant identify any physician who considered her incompetent. He could not. After 3 days of legal letters, the meeting was rescheduled as a confidential settlement conference at Dana's office. Its stated purpose was to discuss temporary finances, the house, and future trust administration. Grant agreed because the deadline on his commercial loan was approaching and because my messages continued to sound defeated. I told him I wanted to prevent public scandal. He replied, "For once, we agree." Emily prepared more carefully than any of us. She reviewed every page Dana intended to discuss and wrote her questions on index cards. She practiced saying, "Please answer what I asked." Whenever Grant tried to redirect, she also called him twice under Dana's guidance. Tennessee law allowed a participant to record a conversation, but Dana preferred not to depend on a private recording that Grant might portray as manipulation. Instead, Emily took detailed notes immediately afterward. During the second call, she told Grant she missed the life they had before everything became frightening. That statement was true, which made it more effective. Grant softened immediately. He said the documents were meant to protect them and promised the trust could save their marriage. "Once your father steps aside, no one will be able to come between us," he said. Emily asked whether signing the financial authority papers would make him stop the legal action. Grant replied, "Sign what I bring to the meeting, and we can make all of this disappear." Dana dated and preserved Emily's written account of the call. The morning before the conference, Rebecca's attorney informed investigators that her phone contained a message from Grant requesting capsules with no identifying marks. Another message said he needed the pattern consistent before the appointment. We had already seen part of that sentence in Emily's cloud photograph, so the new confirmation did not appear from nowhere. The full records would require formal legal handling and were not yet ours to present as evidence. Dana warned us not to rely on them at the meeting. Our trap had to work with what Grant knew. We possessed the toxicology reports, loan documents, camera footage, incapacity request, and Emily's testimony. The purpose was not to stage a dramatic confession. It was to make him commit to explanations that could later be tested against the preserved records. "People lie differently when they think the worst evidence is gone," Dana said. Grant believed the sewing box originals had disappeared, and Rebecca was still frightened. He expected us to negotiate from weakness. We intended to let him. On the day of the conference, I arrived early and sat at the far end of Dana's table. A digital recorder rested in plain view beside a written consent form. No one would be secretly recorded. Emily entered with Nicole and wore a charcoal jacket over a blue blouse that had belonged to Margaret. She looked tired but steady. "Do not rescue me in there," she told me. I promised I would not. Grant arrived 10 minutes later with his attorney, carrying a leather portfolio and the same blue pen he had used whenever he wanted to make a signature feel ceremonial. He greeted Dana, ignored Nicole, and gave Emily a wounded smile. "You look better," he said. She replied, "I am." His attorney reviewed the recording consent, and everyone signed. Grant placed several documents on the table: a proposed property agreement, a new durable power of attorney, and a statement asking me to acknowledge that my interference had contributed to Emily's breakdown. Dana began with routine questions about the mortgage and joint accounts. Grant explained that he moved the $84,000 to protect it from outside influence. Emily asked where the money was held. He said a business reserve account. Dana asked whether company creditors could reach it. Grant's attorney interrupted, but Grant answered too quickly. "Not if the trust funds arrive before the hearing." The room went still for half a second. His attorney placed a hand over the page in front of him. Grant corrected himself. "I mean, if Emily chooses to support our household after her birthday." Emily looked down at her index card. "Why does my inheritance determine whether you return money taken from our joint account?" Grant leaned toward her. "Because everything I have done has been to keep our future intact." His tone was gentle, but the mask had begun to slip. Dana moved to the power of attorney and asked why it granted him authority to borrow against separate property. Grant said it was standard language. Emily asked whether he had submitted the home equity loan using her electronic signature. Grant denied it. Dana placed the disputed application on the table. He said Emily must have forgotten signing. Emily asked why the lender's verification calls had been blocked on her phone. Grant replied that she had become overwhelmed by spam. Then Dana displayed a printout showing the lender's number had been manually added to her blocked list from a device registered to Grant. His attorney requested a break. Grant refused. "We are not criminals hiding from questions," he said, and the irony nearly made Nicole laugh. I remained silent. My role was to appear uncertain, perhaps even persuaded. Grant turned to me. Walt, you know Emily has struggled. You have seen it yourself. I said. I have seen her confused. He nodded eagerly. Exactly. That is why someone must manage the money. He had moved from denying incapacity to using it as justification in less than an hour. Dana slid the resignation draft toward me. Walter is prepared to consider stepping aside, she said, if Emily freely chooses the arrangement after every concern is answered. Grant relaxed. He pushed the blue pen across the table toward Emily and opened the power of attorney to the signature page. This ends the fighting, he said. Your father steps back. The house gets sold. The debts are handled. And we start over. Emily did not touch the pen. What debts? She asked. Grant glanced at his lawyer. Household obligations. She repeated the question. What debts? Grant he exhaled. The company loan. Legal costs. The mortgage. Everything we built together. Emily said. Your company debt is not mine. His voice hardened. You promised to help me. There it was not a legal confession, but the entitlement beneath the entire plan. He believed her promise had transferred ownership of her future to him. Grant recovered quickly. He lowered his voice and reached across the table. You are tired. Sign now, and we can talk privately afterward. Emily pulled her hand away. Dana reminded him the conference was recorded and that Emily had the right to independent advice. Grant looked at me. Tell her this is the only way to avoid court. For most of Emily's life, that would have been the moment I answered for her. Instead, I folded my hands. She heard you. Grant's eyes narrowed. Emily turned the final index card over and said, Before I sign anything, I want you to explain why prescription sedatives were in my blood and why the doorbell camera shows you receiving packages from Rebecca Sloan. Dana placed still images from the footage beside the toxicology reports. Grant stared at them, and his attorney immediately told him not to answer. For the first time, fear reached Grant's face before he could replace it with concern. He closed the portfolio and said the meeting was over. Dana replied that he was free to leave, but every financial proposal and statement already made would be preserved. Emily looked at the blue pen resting between them. You said signing would make everything disappear, she said. What exactly were you trying to make disappear? Grant stood so quickly his chair struck the wall. His attorney gathered the documents, but Grant snatched the unsigned power of attorney first. You have no idea what your father has done to us, he told Emily. She answered. Then come back tomorrow and explain it in front of everyone who needs to hear. Dana had already scheduled the second session to include the trust administrator, an investigator, and counsel handling the disputed loan. Grant had believed this meeting would end the conflict. Instead, every explanation he offered had opened another door. He paused at the threshold and looked at me with open hatred. You planned this. I shook my head. Emily did. That truth struck him harder than any insult. His control had always depended on believing she could not act without one man directing her. Now she stood beside the conference table, alert, prepared, and unwilling to follow either of us. Grant left without signing the settlement or returning the money. His attorney followed, already speaking urgently into a phone. Dana stopped the recorder and sealed the documents. Emily sank into her chair, trembling from the effort of remaining calm. I moved toward her, then waited. She reached for my hand on her own. Outside the conference room, an investigator confirmed that Rebecca's preserved messages and payment records had been formally requested. The next morning, Grant would return for what he thought was another negotiation. This time, he would face every piece of evidence he had failed to destroy, and the wife he had spent months teaching everyone not to believe. Grant returned the next morning wearing the same gray suit he had worn when he first asked me for money to save his company. I remembered that day clearly. He had sat in my kitchen with both hands around a coffee cup, admitted he had underestimated payroll, and promised the loan would protect Emily from stress. I had written the check because Margaret was dying and I lacked the strength to investigate another crisis. Now he entered Dana's conference room with his attorney beside him and saw 3 additional people waiting the trust administrator. The investigator assigned to the disputed home equity application, and an attorney representing the institution holding Emily's assets. The digital recorder sat in the center of the table. Dana reminded everyone that the meeting was voluntary and recorded with consent. Grant's attorney asked whether law enforcement was present. Dana answered, "No one here is under arrest. We are addressing financial authority, disputed signatures, and preservation of evidence." Grant looked at Emily. "You turned our marriage into an investigation." She replied, "You turned my body into evidence." Dana began with the unsigned power of attorney Grant had placed before Emily the previous day. She asked him to explain why it granted authority over separate property, medical decisions, borrowing, real estate, digital accounts, and trust distributions. Grant said the form came from an online legal service and that broad language was standard. The trust administrator corrected him. Even with a valid power of attorney, Grant could not automatically override the trust's protective provisions. Any request involving incapacity would require independent medical documentation and institutional review. Grant leaned back. "Then why are we here?" he asked. Emily answered before Dana could. "Because you spent months trying to manufacture the documentation." She placed the neurologist letter beside the timeline she had reconstructed from bank statements, Grant's payments, and her medical symptoms. Each entry showed a date he reported confusion, followed by a date she had consumed supplements he prepared. "You wrote that I forgot conversations before I told anyone I was forgetting," she said. "You were not observing a decline. You were scheduling one." Grant denied preparing medication and said Emily had taken old prescriptions on her own. Dana placed the private laboratory report beside the two hospital toxicology screens. The results identified the same classes of medication in the capsule and in Emily's blood. The independent psychiatrist's evaluation stated that her confusion was consistent with involuntary drug exposure and that she retained decision-making capacity. Grant's attorney argued that none of the reports proved who administered the drugs. "That is correct," Dana said. "So we will not claim more than the evidence shows." She then displayed still images from the doorbell camera. The first showed Grant accepting a bag from Rebecca's car. The second showed him carrying the weekly pill organizer out of the house before Emily's collapse. The third showed him returning with it concealed beneath a folder. Grant said Rebecca had delivered personal medication for him. Emily asked why medication intended for him had been repackaged to resemble her vitamins. He answered that Rebecca had done so without his knowledge. The explanation arrived too quickly, revealing that he knew the capsules had been altered. Dana did not challenge the contradiction immediately. She moved to the home equity application and asked whether Grant had submitted it. He admitted beginning the application but insisted Emily had agreed verbally. The investigator placed the signature page on the table and asked Grant to identify the device used to sign it. The digital record showed the signature came from Grant's office laptop at 1143 p.m., while Emily's phone was inactive, and she was recorded by the home security system entering the upstairs bedroom. Grant said spouses often completed forms for each other, not after the lender requires direct verification. The investigator replied. He then produced the call log showing repeated verification attempts blocked from Emily's phone through a device registered to Grant. This was not a new discovery. We had discussed it the day before, but hearing each fact established by a separate professional stripped away Grant's ability to call it family misunderstanding. He had not merely planned to borrow against the house. He had removed Emily from the approval process while using her name. Grant's attorney requested a private recess. Dana agreed, and they left the room for 15 minutes. During the break, Emily sat with both hands flat on the table, staring at the blue pen Grant had brought again. "He still thinks this can be negotiated," she said. The trust administrator asked whether she wished to end the meeting. Emily shook her head. "No. I spent months being told I could not remember what happened. I need to hear him choose his own explanation." I wanted to tell her she had already done enough, but that would have been another way of deciding how much truth she could bear. When Grant returned, his attorney did most of the speaking. She proposed that the parties resolve the property dispute without allegations of intentional poisoning. Grant would return part of the joint funds, withdraw the request for financial authority, and agree to a temporary separation. In exchange, Emily would refrain from sharing evidence with his clients or the press. Emily looked at him. "You are offering me my own money and calling it peace." Dana asked one final question about the payments to RLS Patient Logistics. Grant repeated that the company performed compliance consulting. The trust attorney placed the corporate registration on the table, showing that the company belonged to Rebecca's brother and had no documented employees beyond him. Dana then read from Rebecca's written statement, which investigators had received through her attorney. Rebecca admitted selling Grant prescription sedatives and repackaging some into unmarked capsules at his request. Grant's lawyer objected that Rebecca was unreliable and attempting to reduce her own criminal exposure. Dana agreed that Rebecca had reasons to protect herself. That is why we are not relying on her statement alone. She placed the payment schedule beside Harold's dated photographs and the camera footage. The dates matched. Grant looked toward the door. The confidence he had worn for months was disappearing, not because of one perfect piece of evidence, but because every separate lie now supported the next. Emily opened the cloud folder on her laptop and displayed the photographs she had taken before Grant destroyed the originals in Margaret's sewing box. One image showed his message to Rebecca, asking for capsules without identifying marks. Another showed the sentence, "I need the pattern consistent before the appointment." The complete phone extraction had not yet been introduced, but the photograph contained metadata confirming when Emily captured it. Grant said the message referred to his own sleep schedule. Emily asked why the appointment occurred on the same date as the neurological capacity evaluation he arranged for her. He did not answer. She showed the draft power of attorney, the lender messages, and his handwritten deadline to obtain her signature before June 14th. "You keep saying you wanted to save our marriage," she said, "but every document you prepared removed my choices. You wanted my name on the assets and your hand on every decision." Grant's face tightened. "I was trying to save what we built," Emily replied. "You were trying to save yourself with what my mother built." The word mother changed him. Grant struck the table with his palm. Not hard enough to threaten anyone, but hard enough to make the recorder jump. "Your family never let me forget where the money came from," he said. "Every dinner, every loan, every piece of advice from your father carried the same message. I was temporary. I was tolerated. I could work for 20 years and still be the man who married into Walter Mercer's money." His attorney told him to stop, but years of resentment had finally outrun discipline. Grant turned to me. "You lent me money because you wanted me indebted to you. You helped buy the house so you could always claim part of it. You offered support, then inspected every decision. I did not deny all of it. I used money to stay important in Emily's life." I said, "That was wrong." Grant seemed startled by the admission. "But my failure does not excuse what you did to her." He looked at Emily and said, "You promised to help me, then you let him take it back." Emily removed her wedding ring and set it beside the blue pen. "I promised, because I loved you," she said. "Then I learned the debt was larger than you admitted, and the company was already collapsing. I changed my mind. A promise is not permanent consent." Grant said she had humiliated him in front of me and Dana. Emily asked whether humiliation justified putting medication into her vitamins. He looked away. "I never wanted you dead," he said. The sentence silenced the room because no one had accused him of intending murder during the meeting. His attorney closed her eyes. Emily's voice remained steady. "You knew I had a heart condition," Grant answered. "The doses were small." Dana stopped the recorder only long enough to confirm everyone understood what had just been said, then restarted it with the time noted. Grant's attorney advised him not to speak further. But the damage was complete. He had admitted knowledge of the doses while trying to deny intent. Grant tried one final defense. He said he had wanted Emily calm enough to sleep, stable enough to sign necessary documents, and protected from financial panic. He described the drugs as a temporary measure that Rebecca assured him was safe. "I was under pressure," he said. "The lender was going to take everything. Employees depended on me. Clients would have sued. We would have lost the house," Emily replied. "You had already lost the company. You just refused to let anyone see it." He insisted he had done it for their future. She pointed to the psychiatrist's report, the damaged sewing box, and the false loan application. "A future where I cannot remember signing my own name is not ours. It is yours." Then she slid the unsigned power of attorney back across the table. "I revoke every permission I ever gave you to speak for me, access my accounts, contact my doctors, or negotiate in my name." Dana confirmed that the formal revocations had already been delivered. Emily's statement was not symbolic. It was notice. The trust administrator announced that the institution had placed permanent enhanced verification on Emily's accounts and would reject any request from Grant, regardless of marital status, unless authorized in person by Emily with independent counsel. I stated that I would not resign in Grant's favor during the remaining weeks of my temporary role. Dana submitted the fraud notice concerning the home equity application, and the investigator confirmed the lender had closed the loan file. Grant's business creditors could pursue his company and personal guarantees, but they could not reach Emily's separate trust through the documents he had prepared. His attorney asked whether Emily intended to pursue criminal charges. Dana answered that the toxicology reports, Rebecca's statement, payment records, camera, files, disputed signature, and recorded admissions had already been preserved for the appropriate authorities. No one in that room could promise Grant a particular outcome. The law would move at its own pace, but his plan had failed before the trust transferred, before the house sold, and before he could convert Emily's confusion into legal control. Grant looked at me as though I had taken something from him. "You won," he said. It would have been satisfying to agree. Instead, I looked at Emily. This was never mine to win. Grant followed my gaze and finally understood what he had lost. Not merely access to $2.4 million, the house equity, or the $84,000 he had moved. He had lost his ability to define Emily to everyone around her. The wife he called confused had reconstructed his timeline. The woman he said needed protection had protected the evidence. The daughter he assumed would exchange one controlling man for another had refused both roles. Grant gathered his papers, leaving the blue pen behind. At the door, he said to Emily, "You will regret destroying our life." She answered, "I regret how long I helped you hide what it had become." He left with his attorney. Two investigators waiting in the lobby asked him to remain available for an interview. He did not look back. The consequences unfolded over months, rather than in one dramatic afternoon. Grant's consulting clients suspended their contracts when the licensing investigation became public. His lender obtained judgment on the commercial guarantee, and his company entered liquidation. Rebecca cooperated through her attorney, surrendered pharmacy records, and accepted responsibility for illegally distributing controlled medication. Her cooperation did not erase what she had done, but it helped investigators reopen complaints involving Briar Glen. They did not conclude that Grant had directly caused Laura Baines's death. The evidence could not support that claim. They did find that medication procedures had been manipulated, records had been incomplete, and residents had received sedatives without adequate review. Harold attended every hearing with Laura's photograph in his coat pocket. When the state issued its findings, he called me and said, "They finally wrote down that she was not imagining it." He did not sound victorious. He sounded like a father who had waited 2 years for someone official to believe his child. Emily filed for divorce. Through her attorney, she recovered most of the $84,000 after Grant's transfer was traced to an account his business creditors could have reached. He agreed to return the remaining funds and withdraw claims against her separate property as part of the civil settlement. The criminal investigation continued beyond the end of our family case, and I learned not to confuse consequences with spectacle. Grant was not dragged away from the conference table in handcuffs. He was forced instead to live without the protections his charm, marriage, and reputation had provided. He lost clients, financial control, and the authority to speak for Emily. The house in Farragut was sold under court-approved terms after the separation. Emily chose the real estate agent, reviewed every offer, and decided how her share would be handled. I did not approve or reject the sale. For the first time since I helped make the down payment, I treated the property as hers rather than evidence of my sacrifice. Emily moved into a modest apartment near downtown Knoxville, close enough to walk to a coffee shop and far enough from me that visits required an invitation. Her recovery was uneven. Some mornings she felt clear and energetic. Other days, a forgotten word or misplaced key sent panic through her because Grant had trained her to interpret every ordinary lapse as proof that her mind was failing. She worked with a trauma therapist, rebuilt her publishing relationships, and completed the book project one client had nearly canceled. I offered money once, then caught myself and asked what she actually needed. She said, "Dinner on Sunday. No advice unless I request it." Those became our rules. I arrived at 6, brought food, and waited until she asked before fixing anything. Sometimes she asked about contracts or taxes. Sometimes we discussed baseball and never mentioned Grant. Trust did not return as a grand reconciliation. It returned through small moments in which I resisted the urge to take over. On Emily's 39th birthday, Dana transferred full control of the trust according to Margaret's original instructions. I could have petitioned to remain an advisor. Part of me wanted to. Fear had not disappeared simply because Grant was gone. I imagined predatory investments, future partners, medical emergencies, and every mistake money could magnify. But keeping control would have repeated the belief that made Emily vulnerable in the first place, that love entitled someone else to manage her life. I signed the final resignation and handed her the account documents without conditions. "Your mother trusted you to grow into this," I said. I should have trusted the same. Emily did not offer immediate forgiveness. She read the papers carefully, asked Dana questions, and signed only after she understood every line. Watching her do that gave me more pride than any obedient signature ever could. My birthday gift to her was Margaret's cedar sewing box. A woodworker had repaired the damaged lining and polished the brass leaf clasp, but I asked him to leave one faint cut visible beneath the blue fabric. Not as a wound, but as proof that damage can be repaired without pretending it never happened. Inside, I placed Margaret's photograph and the key to Emily's new apartment. She turned it over in her palm. "This is my only copy," she said. "I know." She looked at me for a long moment. "You are not asking for a spare." I shook my head. "Not unless you decide I should have one." She smiled. Small and uncertain, but real. "Not yet." I told her that was fine. When I left, she walked me to the hallway. I heard the lock turn after the door closed, and for once the sound did not feel like rejection. I stood outside her apartment holding nothing, no key, no checkbook, no legal authority, no plan for what she should do next. Years earlier, that emptiness would have frightened me. I had believed a father's value came from being the person who could enter any room, solve any crisis, and pay any price. Grant exploited that belief, then twisted it until Emily could no longer distinguish protection from control. I did get my daughter out of danger, just as Harold's note demanded, but saving her life was only the first responsibility. The harder one was giving it back. I walked toward the elevator and heard Emily laughing inside the apartment during a phone call with Nicole. She sounded like herself, not the child I remembered, not the victim Grant described, and not the daughter I had tried to manage. She sounded like a woman behind her own locked door, deciding for herself whom to let in.